The Dark Angels are considered amongst the most powerful and secretive of the Loyalist Space Marine Chapters. They were the first legion of the original 20 Space Marines to be created during the first founding of the 30th Millennium. Though they claim complete allegiance and service to the Emperor of Mankind, their actions and secret goals at times seem at odds with that professed loyalty, as the Dark Angels strive above all other things to atone for an ancient crime of betrayal committed over 10,000 standard years ago, against the trust of the Emperor during the time of the Horus Heresy. The Dark Angels stand first amongst the Space Marine Chapters, as they have done since their very inception as the First Legion. They are a proud chapter, with traditions and rituals that date back to the earliest days of the Imperium of Man. The origins of the Dark Angels remain shrouded in mystery. Few Imperial records of the chapter's beginnings still exist, nor are there many mentions of the part it played in the Emperor's Great Crusade during the early 31st Millennium. Most references in the histories of the Imperium to its deeds during the accursed times of the Horus Heresy have actually been expunged. Yet, a legend persists that at one point the Dark Angels teetered on the very brink of heresy, and that an act of the most terrible betrayal dishonoured all of the First Legion's feats of valour, leaving an enduring stain upon all of its successor chapters' honour. Such is their shame that from that time onward, the Dark Angels and their unforgiven successors, of which there are more than 19 currently in Imperial service, strive for absolution from the sins of millennia past. The Dark Angel's secret. The Dark Angel's terrible secret is this. During the Horus Heresy, some of their brethren were turned to the side of chaos. The Renegades were defeated in a battle that destroyed the Dark Angels' Legion homeworld, Caliban, but many of the traitor Dark Angels survived to be cast through space and time by the direct intervention of the Chaos Gods. These survivors are known to those few Dark Angels granted knowledge of their existence as the Fallen Angels, or just the Fallen. In the eyes of the chapter's leaders, there is only one way that the chapter can ever atone for its shame, restoring its honor and trust in the eyes of the Emperor. All of the fallen must be found, and either made to repent their ancient sin, or slain. This story of treachery and betrayal is the Dark Angels' hidden shame, and their secret mission to destroy all of the fallen is now their only hope of salvation. No one knows of this other than the Dark Angels, their successor chapters, and perhaps the Emperor himself, interred within his golden throne. The chapter has been shaped by its dark past, and is secretive and monastic in nature, with much time given over to worship and prayer. There are many different levels within the chapter which individuals may gradually rise through. On attaining each level, they are granted a little more knowledge of the truth behind the Dark Angel's origins, but only the highest ranking members of the chapter, the members of what is known as the Inner Circle, know the terrible, shameful secret of what occurred 10,000 standard Terran years ago. Dark Angel's Legacy. The Dark Angels hold more battle honours than almost any other chapter. Its only equals are its own successors. The chapter has fought the length and breadth of the Imperium and beyond, against every foe that has ever beset mankind. Dark Angels have held Orc wars at bay, crushed planetary uprisings, and saved entire star systems from the incursions of the ruinous powers. They have fought across searing deserts, in the cold void of space, in dense carnivorous alien jungles, and in the depths of the wildest underhives. Yet, while chapters such as the Blood Angels and the Ultramarines are lauded wherever they fight, the Dark Angels shun laurels and turn their backs upon adulation. Even though the chapter has stood side by side with every major arm of the Imperium's military, it has always maintained a distance and aloofness that sets its brethren further apart from the bulk of humanity, and even from other Space Marines. When the Dark Angels join a larger force to execute a great war or Imperial crusade, they do so according to their own unfathomable goals. When a Dark Angel's force is committed to such a conflict, it invariably remains aloof. Its officers keep their own counsel on matters of tactics and strategy, and prefer to maintain their own lines of communication and supply sources. Even when dealing with the Battle Brothers of other Astartes chapters, the Dark Angels often remain sullenly quiet at the Space Marine Command Councils and tactical briefings, though that is not to suggest that they are any less effective on the battlefield. When the Dark Angels do undertake joint operations alongside other chapters, it is quite common for them to do so with others amongst the so-called Unforgiven, the successor chapters of the original Dark Angels Legion. The successors of the First Legion maintain especially close relations, their officers all being members of the Inner Circle. This mysterious body provides a ready-made command network that the Unforgiven chapters can utilize to great effect when coordinating their activities. There is no presumption that the leaders of the Dark Angels have any inherent superiority over those of the other Unforgiven chapters. Rather, the leaders work together closely, and if needed, elect one of their number as nominal commander for the duration of the campaign. The Hunt for the Fallen. In one matter, however, the officers of the Dark Angels have superiority over those of the other Unforgiven chapters, through the workings of the Inner Circle, the Hunt for the Fallen. When hunting those turncoat Dark Angels who escaped the fall of Caliban, the Unforgiven operate under the auspices of the highest ranked of the Inner Circle, and the very highest of these is the Supreme Grand Master himself, the Chapter Master of the Dark Angels. Through the machinations of the Unforgiven's Inner Circle, its members are eternally vigilant, never resting in the hunt for the Fallen. Even though knowledge of the Fallen is withheld from the majority of the Brethren, the results of post-battle debriefings and psi-induced stress purges are fed back to the Inner Circle, and any sign of the presence of a Fallen is analysed. In addition, the Dark Angels' chaplains are permanently attached to a company, and this allows them to hear the confessions of their brothers and to keep a close watch for signs of the Fallen. When such traces are discovered, the Inner Circle moves without hesitation, redeploying Unforgiven forces wherever they happen to be and retasking them with their new target. In most cases, it is the Raven Wing that locates such activity, and the Death Wing that delivers the killing blow. But, on occasion, entire Dark Angel strike forces have been recalled from campaigns and committed to engage an enemy that only the highest ranked of its officers have any true knowledge of. While a great deal of the Unforgiven's efforts and resources are committed to the hunt for the Fallen, the majority of the Brethren have no knowledge of the matter. Rather, the Dark Angels and their successors are constantly warned against the words of the heretic, and their chapter dogma extols the virtues of the eternal hunt for those who would forswear the most powerful of oaths. The company chaplains preach sermons that tell of legendary figures betrayed by their own, often having fought in battles far from home. Numerous such tales exist, and each is revealed as part of a slow, deliberate pattern, the Brethren monitored all the while for their reaction. Only upon his ascension to the Inner Circle is a Battle Brother told anything approaching the truth, and even then, there are some secrets known only at the very highest tiers. How much of the shame of the Dark Angels a Battle Brother knows depends upon his station within the chapter, and how far the agents of the Inner Circle trust him. He may have fought the Fallen unwittingly, believing his foe yet another vile traitor worthy only of death. Perhaps his sergeant knew more, certainly his company master did, but he himself almost certainly would not. Conversely, there are some higher-ranked Brethren who, despite exemplary service, are never inducted into the Inner Circle. Perhaps the company chaplains harbour some small doubt or have some reason to believe the individual would not be able to bear the terrible truth of what occurred during the Horus Heresy. Such Astartes are unlikely to progress much further, for at the highest levels of authority, the chapter is ever engaged upon the hunt for the fallen. Dark Angels Chapter History. The Dark Angels were the first of the Emperor's Space Marine Legions, and in their earliest incarnation fought as the personal army of the Master of Mankind in the dawning years of the Great Crusade. They also fought in the shadowed campaigns that had preceded it. As the prototype of what were to become the Legiones Astartes, the Dark Angels served in the final days of the Unification Wars and the early years of the Great Crusade, both as the template for the more specialized legions that were to come after them, and a standard by which these successors would be measured. They were also among the best equipped of Imperial units, making use of large numbers of advanced archaeotech and plasma weapons. In this period, the Dark Angels were not even known as the First Legion, as no others existed yet, for the Emperor simply referred to them as his Angels of Death, or the Six Hosts. These transhuman troops dominated the final days of the Wars of Unification, easily defeating all their Terran opponents and forcing those among the tech priests of Mars who had intervened in the conflict on Terra to sue for peace. From this point on, the First Legion ascended in power and the height of the Emperor's favour. But once the most numerous and powerful of the Space Marine Legions, the First Legion's numbers would be depleted, and its primacy ended by the middle years of the Great Crusade due to solar decades of savage warfare. This was particularly effective in the wars of the Rangdan Xenocides, one of the most apocalyptic campaigns of the Great Crusade. The scars of these battles would change the Dark Angels, as would their reunification with their Primarch, Lionel Johnson, and the introduction of fresh blood from his adopted homeworld of Caliban. Caliban was a death world dominated by a warlike, feudal society of techno-barbarians. Caliban's warrior orders provided fertile ground for the Legion's regeneration, and its martial codes and practices were extensively incorporated and adopted by the rebuilding Legion. Dark Angels' origins. Stark and uncompromising, the Dark Angels were the first of the Emperor's Space Marine Legions and the truest to the mold from which the Legiones Astartes had been struck. They were killers of the purest and most refined kind, for whom there could be no other destiny but a lifetime of war and death in the name of the Imperium and humanity. The Dark Angels did not build empires, made no attempt to master the ways of peace or the subtle skills of the artist, craftsman, or diplomat. They offered no excuses for their nature and made no compromises in the pursuit of their assigned duty, shirking neither the price they paid in blood nor the price paid in infamy and solitude. The Dark Angels' greatest battles are to be found in no catalogue of Imperial compliance or roll of honour. No scholars or poets sing of these glories or remember those fallen in their prosecution. For they fought against foes so monstrous that it was deemed necessary that all mention of them be erased from history. Such was the nature of the Dark Angels' service, not only to be persecutors of the Great Crusade, but also to serve as the Imperium's most potent bulwark against the unknown terrors that lurked in the dark between the stars. The heraldry of the Dark Angels proclaims their lineage. The first of the Emperor's Legiones Astartes, but other than that simple fact, little is known of the origins of the Legion and its initial gene stock. The genesis of the Legiones Astartes as a whole is a subject shrouded in much secrecy. It is perhaps the greatest and most enduring of the Emperor's many works, and a subject scholars have been warned away from in the latter days of his Imperium. What is known with some certainty is that, of all the many breeds of these transhuman warriors, the Dark Angels were conceived by the Emperor as a template and prototype for those that would follow. They were distilled from the genetic code of the most stable of all his Primarchs, and without any attempt to foster specific traits or curb the eccentricities of the stock from which they sprang. Even so, the process by which these first samples were produced was long and laborious, initiated perhaps a standard century or more before the end of the Unification Wars of Terror, and consuming a vast number of test subjects to produce but a handful of stable proto-Astartes. Of these initial creations, referenced in fragmentary records unearthed in the Imperial Archives as the primordial strain, almost none are known to have survived initial combat trials and surgical testing. But these Dark Angels form the basis for the initial cultures of the First Legion, and, by merit of the refined process formulated with their creation, the other Space Marine legions as well. Early Chapter Organization. This grand experiment exacted a bloody toll upon those territories controlled by the Emperor, for its most critical components were untainted human subjects, all within a specific range of age and physical fitness. Given the state of terror in the wake of the wars of Old Night, its surface polluted the twin scourges of atomic bombardment and genetic phage. Such subjects were limited. The initial experiments were conducted with the youth of the Emperor's conquered foes, and those purchased from the nomadic clans that abounded in the wastes of pre-Unity Terror, and later the toll was borne by flesh tithes exacted on those territories brought, willingly or not, into the fold of the Imperium. As such, the Dark Angels did not bear the stamp of any single gene stock, unlike some of the other legions during their earliest years, whose character had been moulded by the nature of their initial intake. Their first recruits, selected from the best of the stock available to the Emperor, were diverse in origin and shared no single cultural heritage that would shape the way in which they made war. Indeed, the diversity of their origins brought a wealth of disparate martial traditions into the fledgling legion. The dour infantry of the Frankish plains and the islands of Albia brought with them the brutal coda that had conquered half the ruined lands of the continent of Europa, the warriors of the far Anatolic steppes a skill at cavalry warfare, the berserkers of frozen Scandia a murderous efficiency, and from a dozen other Terran cultures yet more of the arts of war. The First Legion was the crucible in which all the savage lore of Old Night, all the bitter knowledge and red-handed wisdom accumulated in a millennia of war was to be distilled and fashioned into a weapon of rare potency. In those first faltering years of the grand experiment that was the Legion as Astartes, the proto-warriors of the First Legion, barely a few hundred strong, were encouraged to eschew the names of their own people and embrace a new unity, unmarked by old loyalties. This was often taking instead the names of heroes from the old tales that had survived the Age of Strife. In the first rolls of honor of the Legion can be found Gilgamesh, Heracles, Turkon, Hengist, and other names imbued by time with the power of legend. Combined with the grim aspect granted by the gene seed of the first Primarch, these warriors quickly gained a reputation among the disparate throng that was at the time the army of the Emperor. Fighting at first as small groups within the ranks of the Emperor's host, plying both the skills of their origins and of the drill masters of the Imperial laboratories of the Biotechnical Division, they would come to be known as the Uncrowned Princes, or simply Crowns. This was a homage both to their place in the line of battle and the destiny bestowed upon them by their creator. The Uncrowned Princes, or Crowns, was a title that would inspire both a sense of unity and a certain arrogance in the first Space Marines, and spur them to lead the way amongst the growing brotherhood of the Legion as Astartes. This, in the Legion's earliest moments, was the genesis of the hosts of the First Legion, which would later be refined by their Primarch, Lionel Johnson, into the hexagrammaton wings of his Dark Angels. This was a myriad of informal groups within the early companies of the Legion that worked to adapt the doctrines of battle brought from those disparate origins and create a coda of battle fit for the transhuman armies of the Emperor. The hosts were not bound by company or commander and existed throughout the Legion. At any given battle or engagement, at least some small number of a given host would be present to advise and lead should their expertise be required. In the early years of the First Legion's existence, there were many more hosts that would later exist under the Hexagrammaton organization, with as many as 18 such formations noted by their distinct heraldry in the earliest records of the Unification Wars where the Astartes appear. The Third Siege of Antioch in 603.M30 saw the participation of 9 distinct hosts across 4 separate companies of the Legion. Though at this point the Dark Angels numbered less than 30 warriors each, and displayed significant tactical overlap in the methods they employed to breach the walls of that ancient enclave. Time would see the many hosts of those chaotic years quickly resolved into a smaller number of more focused hosts, but in those early years, with their brother legions still but handfuls of warriors newly cast from a rough mould, the First Legion became the testbed for the various tactics and doctrines that would later become the Principia Bellicosa. As the other legions grew to a size large enough to engage in small-scale combat operations, some of the more specialized hosts became obsolete, unnecessary in the face of warriors more adept at that style of warfare, while others were made extinct by the inadequacies of their methods and brutal nature of war in the 30th millennium. Far from harming the Legion, the process of bloody evolution left it strong, a weapon well honed by fighting on terror. It also forged a bond between the disparate warriors who made up that early legion, a bond based upon the sense of superiority and distinction instilled in them by the servants of the Emperor that trained them, and the awe they inspired in those that the Dark Angels fought beside. Fall of the Thunder Warriors. As with all the Legiones Astartes, the First Legion was intended as a replacement for the brigades of the Thunder Warriors, that unstable experiment in the creation of Proto-Astartes which, by the middle years of the Unification Wars, had run its course. The Thunder Warrior regiments had been the tool needed for their time, an unrefined and savage weapon to match the grim tyrants and debauched enemies that had inherited old Earth during the Age of Strife. Yet, in comparison to the Legiones Astartes, the Thunder Warriors were a rough breed, powerful to be sure, perhaps even individually more so than their new transhuman kin, but unable to quell their fury to work in unison. The Thunder Warriors were a mob, a storm of fury and blades that rolled over its foes, while the Legiones Astartes were a true army, and in their unity could withstand any onslaught. Tales and theories beyond count surround the Thunder Warriors and their sudden disappearance from the Empyrean's history, most being fabrications and sophistry of the worst kind, though a few warrant further regard. One such tale is of note, a tale told among the nomadic tribes that inhabit the wastelands around Mount Ararat and speak not only of Thunder Warriors, but also of an army clad all in grey, dark as the clouds of a storm and branded all as one. These warriors, so say the hill nomads, awaited the return of the few surviving Thunder Warriors, exhausted by their victory and, rather than giving a salute to their valor, cut them down in a thunderous volley of bolt and plasma. This tale is far different from the heroic tale told by the Remembrancers to mark the end of the Unification Wars, but in keeping with the brutal necessities of the Emperor's far-reaching plans. It is possible that the warriors, branded all as one, could be the Dark Angels, who all bore the sigil of their numeration bold upon their battle plate, for battles of that legion were oft removed from Imperial record, the details expunged and forgotten. Actual proof that the mysterious army waiting for the Thunder Warriors was the Dark Angels does not exist, not even in the archives of the Imperial Palace. Yet, several anecdotes from the later years of the Great Crusade do seem to support the theory, all related to a near-obsessive preoccupation with the hunting down and destruction of those few renegade Thunder Warriors that survived and fled Terra, over and above the standing orders of the Imperial Court to suppress all such renegades. On at least 3 occasions, fleets of the Dark Angels altered course in order to engage and destroy Thunder Warrior survivors, often making wide detours on simple rumors of such activity. Such an obsession is notable for what was an otherwise stoic Space Marine Legion, and would seem to hint at a more personal interest in the resolution of any encounter with surviving Thunder Warriors. Perhaps there is even a sense of shame in having allowed any Thunder Warriors to escape some previous engagement. Another ancient source claims that even before the Unification Wars had ended, the Thunder Warriors, already jealous of their replacements' long lives and near immortality compared to their own inevitable descent into madness and death, at least realized that their creator had cursed them with short lifespans as a result of their imperfect genetic augmentations. In their rage and fear, they turned upon the Emperor for what they saw as his betrayal. It was the cadre of several hundred custodians of the Legio Custodes, the Emperor's lifeguard, even then believed to have been led by the legendary Constantin Valdor, and accompanied by several thousand prototype Astartes of the Dark Angels of the newborn Space Marines, that stood in the Emperor's defense, carrying out a merciless culling of the obsolete and rebellious Gene soldiers. However, given the renowned secrecy of the Dark Angels and the frequency with which their campaigns and deeds were obfuscated by Imperial decree, it is unlikely that the truth of this matter will ever be known. New Warhammer 40k videos coming every single week. That's right, subscribe to Jam Punch because I'm going to be back every week, and if you liked it, please give it a like. But yeah, I will see you next time. My name is George, this is Jam Punch, and I will see you soon.